Hello, Cross Connectors. Natalie here. As we're about to head into the New Testament with our episode on Acts, we want to reshare with you the episodes that we recorded earlier this year of the four Gospels. Today we have for you the Gospel of Matthew, and over the next couple of days we will release, again, Mark, Luke, and John. If you want to get ahead and listen to them quickly, you can scroll back to February, March, April, and May, and you will find these episodes there. But we're also re-releasing them right now for you over the next couple of days so that they are at the top of your feed before we get to the book of Acts. We especially will commend to you our episode on the Gospel of Luke, but we want to give you all four. So, here we are with our episode on the Gospel of Matthew from February of 2025. Enjoy this rehash. Welcome to Cross Connections, Season 2, Cover to Cover, as we read along with you each week and discuss the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Join us as we discover how these stories connect us to God, to our inner selves, and to one another in a world that tries so hard to disconnect us. Welcome back, one and all, to Cross Connections Season 2. As requested, you all wanted to hear about the Gospel of Matthew. Yes, we're trying to go through the Bible from cover to cover, starting at Genesis, ending in Revelations, but we do have you reading the Gospels along the way. So we heard your cries. You want to talk about the Gospels now.
We have heard your cry.
Just like God, we too are merciful.
That's right.
And
ask,
we will answer
and
your
ye
call.
shall receive.
Yes, ask and the door will be opened unto you, unless we're recording a podcast.
Do not open this door.
Do not enter. All right, so what we decided is that we will do bonus episodes every time we have finished a gospel in its entirety, and you have made it through to the end of the Gospel of Matthew. So congratulations.
Yay.
On top of getting through Genesis, Exodus, and the beginning of Leviticus, you've made it through Matthew.
Impressive stuff.
So we're not going to go super deep on any of this because we're going to do this every time we get through the end of a gospel. So we're going to get back to Matthew again in a little while. I could look up exactly when we would be doing that, but you all can do it too if you check your...
It's about 3 months from now.
It's about 3 months from now. So we'll be hitting this gospel about 4 times this year. And so we're just going to go kind of, top level here. So, and we have some questions already that were submitted by folks that we will get to, but keep your Matthew questions in mind, send them along to us, and we will circle back to that. So before we get too far in, this is the Gospel of Matthew. Where does the Gospel of Matthew come from, and where does it sit relating to the other 3 Gospels we have?
So you may remember, and we've referenced this several times in the podcast, that in the year 70 AD, the temple in Jerusalem is destroyed by the Romans. It is a major, major, major event in the ancient Near East. They don't just destroy the temple, they also do another destruction of Jerusalem. This is different than the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem that was done in 586 BC by the Babylonians, which we've also talked about. This is the second destruction of the temple, and it's the last destruction of the temple, and it's never been rebuilt since.
Yeah, real estate issues.
And right. It's a hot real estate market, as I said. It's not just that the building was destroyed, it's that the people flee from Jerusalem. And they go all over the place and to seek refuge. A whole bunch of them go north to Syria, mostly Antioch in Syria. And so most scholars believe that the Gospel of Matthew is written in Syria post-destruction of the temple. We think somewhere around the year 80 to 90 is when it is written. And here's what's going on in this community of refugees whose homeland has been destroyed and whose temple has been destroyed again, is they're asking a lot of questions. And so you have two different communities that are fleeing Jerusalem and going to Syria. You have Jews and you have Jewish Christians who were Jewish and are now Christian. And they're in Antioch, Syria, trying to figure all this out. And asking the big, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Were they yet referring to themselves as Christian, or were other people
So
referring to them as Christian yet?
The book of Acts says it is in Antioch where Christians are first started to be called Christians.
Okay.
So for a while, everyone's just Jews, but we're Jews who believe in this Messiah Jesus, and over there are the Jews that don't believe in the Messiah Jesus. And then all of a sudden, it's in Antioch that a distinction is really made.
Yeah, it's a really defining moment.
They're asking the big questions that anyone asks at the end of a trauma, like why did this happen? Like why didn't God protect us? There's lots of answers that are flying around. I mean, some Christians are like, well, because you guys didn't accept Jesus. There's other answers flying around, like you guys have this heretical take on Judaism, and you're following Jesus, and that's why we've been destroyed, or we weren't, faithful enough, and that's why. And so everyone's wrestling with like, what does it mean to be Jewish? What does it mean to be Christian? What does it mean to be the people of God? What does it mean now that this temple has been destroyed? And in all of that angst, Matthew composes this gospel. It is oftentimes known as the most Jewish of the gospels.
And I could hear that when I was reading, especially having just read Genesis and Exodus. It is so clear that this was written to a Jewish audience.
Yeah. And so partially to speak to the Christians who had been Jewish, and partially to speak to the Jewish audience in Syria and Antioch. And the main message, and I think I will probably say this like 15 times in this episode, is that the whole point is to ground the story of Jesus into the Jewish people, into the story of the Jewish people, as if to say, yes, Jesus is a new thing. God coming in flesh is a new thing, but it is firmly grounded in everything that has come before.
Right. And we see this right off the bat in the genealogy when Matthew roots Jesus' genealogy starting with Father Abraham.
Before we get there, I'm still kind of curious about, so Matthew's written in Syria.
Mm-hmm. We think, yeah.
It probably in Syria, probably
80
or 90. We have these other gospels. Do we have a sense of when they were written, or if any of these, one of the things you notice if you do read all of the gospels is that a few of them sound sort of similar?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So traditionally, it is thought that Mark was written first. Again, as Rick pointed out, it is believed that this was written after the destruction of the temple with Matthew. There is some debate. A minority of scholars think that Matthew could have been written before the destruction of the temple, but the reason they tend to think it was written after the destruction is because Matthew talks about the destruction of the temple at the end of his gospel. And, the fact of the matter is historians don't tend to think that would have been a prediction. They would have thought he's able to talk about this because, in fact, he knew it to have happened.
Yeah.
Mark, it's been a while since I've thought about Mark. I think Mark is traditionally considered to have been written before the destruction of the temple.
It's like 68 to 72. It's like somewhere. It's either right before
or
during
right after.
Or right after.
Yeah.
It is very much a trauma document.
Right. It is. It is shorter.
Very few details.
Very few details. Even if you look at the amount of chapters, it is significantly shorter. So, and then like you said, Natalie, it is usually assumed by scholars because of the overlap among Matthew, Luke, and Mark that Matthew and Luke would have used Mark as kind of the template, and then they
like a reference document.
Yeah, like a reference document. They kind of incorporated some flourishes. So that's kind of the relationship to Mark.
And so Luke was written around the time that Matthew was written-ish.
Similar.
And probably somewhere in Greece or Turkey, but
Yep.
not in
Right.
Antioch. It's not as much of a trauma document.
Yes, and also traditionally it is understood, as Rick pointed out, Matthew is written for a more Jewish audience. Luke was written for a more quote unquote Gentile or pagan audience. And you just see that in stylistic choices. Luke, even very small things. Luke will talk about Jewish ceremonies, and when he does, he will explain them almost as if he is explaining them for someone that is not quite as familiar with them. Matthew does not do that. So again, scholars pick up on small things to make those determinations. Another example to talk about the genealogies is Luke roots his genealogy of Jesus all the way to Adam. The sense there theologically is maybe Luke is giving a very expanded account and trying to make sense of why God would incorporate the Gentiles into his salvific plan. Matthew is more focused on Abraham, Jesus' Jewishness. If he's writing to a more Jewish audience, he's trying to kind of explain this is what Jesus means for us Jews who believe him to be the Messiah. Mark's kind of just doing his own thing.
He is.
He's really, like y'all have said, a trauma document. He has a naked guy running around. We'll get there eventually.
We'll get there.
And not too long because Mark is shorter. But
yeah.
But Mark isn't as different from those three as John is.
Right.
Totally different. And so
Right.
Matthew, Mark, and Luke are typically called the synoptics, which means from the same eye or from the same field of vision. And John is just different. There are very few stories that overlap between the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John.
Right.
John is
And I think you might have said this, or I might have just literally spaced out. The latest, considered the latest gospel.
Yes.
Significantly later than the synoptic gospels, right? The synoptic gospels, no matter how you date them, they do tend to be grouped around pre-100 CE. John is typically considered to
Around
be later.
100.
Yeah, around 100. Maybe one other thing to say is where this word gospel comes from. That comes from the Greek word euangelion, the word for good news, glad tidings. We've all heard this in hymns and sermons, and this probably isn't news to anyone. But I think it's also maybe important to say that in the context of the day, the Roman context, this was a word that really announced, in some ways, a political event.
Yep.
That, remember, we also have to remember this is situated in the Roman Empire. There's Caesar. And this was news often of military victory.
glad tidings of Caesar.
Yeah, the glad tidings of Caesar. And so where's the first time Matthew used it? I think it's Matthew 4. Where is it in Matthew 4? I'm saying this without a reference, but I know off the top of my head, it says Jesus went proclaiming the good news of the kingdom.
And everyone reading that would have been like, oh, that sounds exactly like what comes
Yes.
out of the Caesar's
Yes.
press office.
Yes.
Like, it's exactly the word for word, except we're talking about Jesus instead of
Exactly.
Caesar.
Yeah, Matthew 4:23. Jesus went through Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news, euangelion, gospel, of the kingdom, and then curing every disease and every sickness among the people. Is the end of that verse. So that's
the
where we.
Gospels are, they're named to be clearly, they're political.
Some of the language, is borrowed straight from the language around the Roman Empire and the Roman
Right.
Empire cult.
Right.
And just like Mark's claim is like Matthew's claim is that Jesus is firmly a part of the Jewish story. The larger claim is that it's the good news is not from Caesar. The good news is from Jesus.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
And we've said this with the Old Testament many times. If you listen to our Leviticus episode, we talk about how there's no separation. Rick put this very well between religious life, cultural life, political life, family life, like
all one thing.
Yeah, it is all he said everything is spiritual. And
Right.
that is really the understanding of the ancient world. There are not these bifurcations we have in modern life. And so it's important to remember in the ancient world, there is no separation between religion and culture and politics. Caesar Augustus is understood to be, in some sense, the Son of God. This was printed on money. And when these good tidings, these press offices, or press releases, I should say, of Caesar come out, it is often connected to the Roman imperial cult. There's an understanding that we are being blessed by the gods in these military victories. So there's no separation.
And think about like the destruction of Jerusalem had been called for by Caesar, by the Roman political arm, and now in Syria, as people have fled, Matthew is saying, yeah, the real leader is not Caesar. The real leader is Jesus.
Right.
The real kingdom is not the Roman Empire. The real kingdom is the kingdom of God,
Right.
the kingdom of the heaven. It's like, nope, you're wrong.
Yeah.
We got it.
And against
Yeah.
all evidence too.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Because in some sense, this is a very radical claim, because you look at the world around you at the time, the destruction of the temple, fleeing Jerusalem, and there's a very strong sense Caesar is the man in charge around here.
Yep.
Everything is going according to plan from their perspective, but the gospel writers are saying, not so quick.
Not so quick.
There's something different going on.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more that can be said about that term gospel, but that is important context, and that's where we get the phrase for the gospels. It comes from that language. So
Wow, that's really good to know. All right, so we were about to hit on the genealogies. Let's answer that or have that discussion in response to a question that we got via Spotify from Bruce, who said, I appreciate you including some discussion on the New Testament readings as well. Here you go, Bruce. Particularly the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew and how it relates to genealogies shared in Genesis. Why is Mary's husband Joseph listed as the father of Jesus and the bloodline traces to Joseph when Mary was conceived by the Holy Spirit? What significance is there that the bloodline of Jesus stopped with Joseph? And then he writes, I suspect both answers tie into the genealogy accounts shared in Genesis, correct? So yeah, we do start off with a genealogy here in Matthew. It was one of the first things that made me feel like we're reading Genesis and Exodus again, as here's a
It's
genealogy.
so interesting to read this as we have just been reading
Yeah.
the beginning of the Torah, because it feels so similar, because it is. And again, like there's several theological claims that are being made through this genealogy. And the one I've already said is we're grounding the story of Jesus into the story we've already know and love and that we've been reading. It's the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and David, and Ruth, and all the other names we know from Sunday school. Jesus comes out of that. That's theological claim number one. The theological claim number two is that Jesus is of the house of David.
Yep.
So we haven't, in our Old Testament reading, we haven't gotten to establishing a kingdom of Israel or Judah yet. We'll get there, but the prototypical king is David, and in order to do that, we have to. Mary wasn't from the house of David. Joseph was,
Yeah.
and so the theological claim, the reason why we have the genealogy ends with Joseph, is so that we can say Jesus is of the house and lineage of David.
Well, and anybody who was raised by a step parent, maybe not their biological parent, will still, they'll claim their connectedness to that family, whether the
Yeah.
biology goes that way or not. So I think that makes it relatable to those folks.
The other interesting claim is that, some of these people in this genealogy, they don't all have pure resumes.
yeah, they're saucy.
There
There are several women listed,
there
which
are
is not
5
common.
women. So
Yeah.
one of the things that's different about the genealogies here and the genealogies of Genesis is that we have women included.
Yep.
And it would have been really odd. The first readers of Matthew would have been like, what is going on? Why are we including these women? And part of that is the point. I mean, remember the whole story about Tamar that we read in Genesis?
Yes.
Maybe the spiciest story we've gotten to so far. She is specifically named in the lineage of Jesus.
Yep.
We haven't gotten to the whole Bathsheba affair. We will. Bathsheba isn't named, but specifically referred to as the wife of Uriah. Like this child was born through someone else's wife. And so the other theological claim that's being made in the genealogy is that Jesus comes through this thoroughly real, normal, dysfunctional family unit.
Well, and the other person named in there that, again, we haven't gotten to yet is Ruth. And Ruth came in, she's known as she's a big deal for being a convert to Judaism.
Sure. She's a Moabite.
Right.
Yep.
So her inclusion is also particularly because you're writing to a Jewish audience who would have known her and her significance in that way.
Right. And Rahab as well.
Yeah.
Rahab is not an Israelite. We'll get to her in Joshua and a prostitute.
A prostitute.
Yeah, a
right.
prostitute.
So
Yep.
specifically named. And again,
Yep.
like if you were trying to make this a really like dainty document and like just, you know, put everything in the best light possible, you would not have included these names in here. You would have like shoved them under the carpet. But Matthew puts them, like, goes out of his way to reference these stories, these spicy stories, as if to say Jesus comes despite all the stuff that has
Right.
gone on. And if Jesus can come into and out of a family like this, then you know what? Jesus can come into and out of a family like ours too.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a great point.
Yeah. I also feel like there's a little bit of we're trying to name something theological here, and as we've said, there's a few things that the Bible is not necessarily super concerned with. For example, maybe they're just not super concerned with all of the biology.
Right. I do want to just, since we're in the early part of Matthew, we have lots of callbacks here. I think I mentioned this in our episode in Exodus, but lots of callbacks to the Exodus. So just like in the story of the Exodus, Pharaoh wants all the male children thrown into the Nile. Here we have, after Jesus's birth, Herod wants to kill all of the male children of the region in order to get to Jesus. And so very similar diabolical leader stuff going on. The Holy Family ends up going to Egypt because Joseph is warned in a dream, just like the Joseph of the Old Testament was a big dreamer and could interpret dreams and had dreams. Like, it's another callback. Then
He was also told to accept Mary as his wife, despite everything.
he was going to let her go.
Yeah.
And God came to him in a dream
So
and is
here we
like,
go,
no,
another Joseph who dreams.
That's another Joseph who dreams. And then he gets told in a dream that Herod has died. And so the coast is clear. And so the Holy Family make a mini exodus, a journey from Egypt back to the promised land, just like Moses and Joshua and all the people. Finally, when Jesus' first major public act of ministry in the Gospel of Matthew is he climbs a mountain.
Yeah, right.
Just like Moses goes up to receive the 10 Commandments and the blueprints of the tabernacle, Jesus goes up and makes a big commentary basically on the laws that Moses was talking about on Sinai. And so we have Jesus in the early parts of Matthew like a new Moses.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we have like a new Exodus. And I always think about it like we're not going to Jesus did not come to bring us to a new land. Jesus came to bring us to a new kingdom, the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
But it's still all about redemption.
There's so many references in here. I'm sorry. I see you want to say something, Elliot. And this was to fulfill the scriptures when this was to fulfill. I almost want to offer you all a challenge, and I'll do it myself. You're going to go back through Matthew again, maybe on your second time through, write down every time you hear them say, and this was to fulfill the scripture. And then as we're going through cover to cover, see if you can find it as you're going along, reading those Old Testament scriptures. Oh, there's the spot where it said, you know, and you know, your NRSV probably has it in the notes somewhere.
The cross-referencing.
Yeah, there are explicit citations. Yeah, this is to fulfill.
Yeah.
And then to Rick's point, it's important to recognize, and this is the importance of reading the Old Testament, that it's not just in explicit citations. It is in everything that is being said, and you have to pick that up. You know, when Jesus goes down to Egypt, he doesn't say, and this is to be like the Exodus. You know, it would have been
You're
known.
expected to
Yeah, because
do
in
that
the
work.
culture of this writing, that would have been immediately implicit to them, and so it's important to remind ourselves we are removed from this writing, and therefore we need help with some of that original context, and that is what so much of the work of reading these early scriptures are going to do for you. Two thoughts on comments you made, Rick. One is you said the kingdom of heaven, which that is very unique to Matthew.
Yes.
So maybe you can comment on that. But I also wanted to make a comment quickly about Jesus as a new Moses. And in Matthew 5, he goes up and gives the Sermon on the Mount, right? And you pointed out very helpfully how that is meant to evoke this Mosaic receiving and giving of the law. Another thing I wanted to point out, this is pretty nerdy, is that the very literary structure of Matthew, Jesus has 5 teaching discourses throughout Matthew, and that you know that these discourses have come and ended when it says, Matthew will say, when Jesus had finished saying these things. And one of the things scholars have picked up on is that Matthew is doing this 5 times to evoke the 5 Pentateuchal books.
I did not know that.
Of the beginning of the Hebrew Scriptures.
Yeah.
Yep. So there's these
Thank you
5 discourses, and they are meant to represent, in some ways, this is the law, right? This number 5 is really important.
The Old Testament does that too, because the book of Psalms is divided into 5 sections. Each ends with Amen and Amen.
Yep.
And so to reference the 5 books of the
And
Torah.
again, that's something we would never pick up. Like I will fully admit, I didn't know that because I noticed it. I know that because I read a scholar that helped me to come to that realization. So again, just the wisdom of these even the New Testament can be strange texts. But maybe you can say a little bit more about the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven, what is it? Matthew's really the only one that uses that.
Literally, I mean, we use heaven here, and we have a very what do you think of when you hear the word heaven?
Yeah.
Right? You hear angels
ethereal,
with harps
yeah.
and, everyone, peace and hope, and everyone's talking with a hushed voice. So the literal, in the Greek, it's the kingdom of the skies. And so it's that kingdom that is not here, but it is somewhere else. And it is with God. And I think the most important thing for me is that it's the opposition to the kingdom of this world, and specifically the kingdom of Rome.
Right.
We have an alternate political, social, spiritual structure. Our home isn't in Jerusalem that was destroyed. Our home isn't in Syria. Our home isn't even in Wayne.
Right.
Our home, we are members, subjects of the kingdom of the skies.
Right.
With God.
I think the other thing to say is I've certainly been in Christian contexts that very heavily spiritualize this language of the kingdom of heaven, and as you said, this very ethereal way. And I think the other thing to remember is, given Matthew's Jewish context and writing something much more Jewish, it is important to remember Jews do not pronounce or really use the name of God. In Greek, they use the word Lord, Kyrios, to translate often the Hebrew name. But I think part of this too is just that Luke is attempting to be even more respectful than saying the kingdom of God, which is we would never think of that's this. Yeah, Matthew is attempting to be even more heightened, have a heightened attunement to this Jewish respect.
Instead of saying the Lord's kingdom,
right?
The kingdom
of the kingdom of the skies, the kingdom of heaven. So it's I think we have to be very careful not to read that and read it in this overly spiritualized way. It's really just a literary, I think, a literary device showing Matthew's respect. Because, and we're going to get into this question of parables, Matthew is a very earthy book. Jesus is a very earthy guy.
Yes.
And the kingdom is very much, seeds. It's present now, even as it is coming. So just a word of warning there with that language from Matthew. And when we get into the other Gospels, we'll see the more traditional language of the kingdom of God. But maybe...
Do you think anyone has any questions about parables or anything like that?
I think someone might.
We do have a couple of other questions that came in.
I don't know why they're so clear to me.
We promised we would get to these folks. The first person who has a question is Allie in Drexel Hill, and hers are about some of the early bits of Matthew here, so we will listen in.
Good morning. This is Allie. I have a question because I feel like there's some contradiction here in Matthew. From this week's reading, I noticed in Matthew 5, it says, starting in verse 14, "You are the light of the world. A town built upon a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." But then in Matthew 6, it seems to say the exact opposite, where Matthew 6, verse 1, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." How do we reconcile these two? One saying, "Careful to others and let that glorify God," and then the other saying, "When you do good deeds or when you pray, do it in private so that you're not a hypocrite and so that you're not being ostentatious and showing off to others." Where's the middle ground, and how do we do both of these things? Thanks.
Great question, Allie. Thank you so much. Really is so good. I think it's all about like what's going there is some awkwardness here. I get it. And it's all about the internal intention. The thing that ticks Jesus off more than anything in the Synoptic Gospels is hypocrisy, and doing spiritual things for the purposes of things that are not spiritual.
Yep.
And so he like hammers the Pharisees for all of their outward shows, because not just because they're doing it outwardly, but because they're doing the things outwardly so that everyone will be like, "Oh, look at Elliot. Look how spiritual he is. He's always praying."
That's what everyone always thinks.
They do. He's always sitting in his office with the scroll of the Torah and, tithes everything, mint, dill, and cumin. But his heart isn't pure. Like that's where Jesus goes all the time. And so, of course, Jesus wants us to live our lives, our spiritual lives, out in public, right? He wants us to be people of truth and love and grace and mercy and all of that, but not so that other people will, think we're great.
Yeah. In the Message translation, Eugene Peterson says, "Be especially careful when you're trying to be good so that you don't make a performance out of it. It might be good theater, but the God who made you won't be applauding."
Right. Yeah, I think that's very helpful context. It does relate to some degree to the intention of what's being done. Is this being done from, a pure heart, or is this being done in a hypocritical, performative kind of way? It's not about whether it's outward or inward per se. Though, I mean, Jesus in Matthew 6 is like, go into your closet to pray.
But instead of making a show.
Yeah, instead of making
right?
a show.
And
right.
Have you ever seen someone who made a show of their prayer?
Right,
Like,
yes.
yes. I mean, oh my goodness, sometimes
Lord.
Yeah.
Yep. Like you get like the 15-minute long pre-dinner prayer from something like, you're like, come on. Like,
Yeah.
That's such a good example. We all know it when we see it, right?
Yep.
We all know it.
And I think some of this, it kind of comes back around later on in Matthew when Jesus is calling out hypocrites and trying to tell people to watch out for those who claim to be the Son of Man but are not. It's kind of a similar thing. The idea that there are people who speak his name, pray publicly,
but have
and
nothing
yet
going
have
on.
nothing going on, or doing
internally.
None of the actions as we might hear about in other ways, like are not being the salt of the earth and being godliness.
He uses the metaphor of whitewashed tombs that like look great, glistening on the outside, but on the inside they're just rotting away. And so Jesus doesn't really care what your outside looks like.
Right.
Jesus cares about your inside, and so
and so I think that the light is your inside behavior that you don't want to hide.
Right. Well, and two, I think, again, and we haven't gotten there yet in our Old Testament reading, and of course, Matthew is very concerned with Jesus as a new Moses, but like all of the gospel writers, Jesus is coming out of this prophetic tradition, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Hosea, where the concern moves from the action itself to the heart, or I would even say the justice of the action. Jesus is very deeply concerned with the justice inherent to spirituality. And that goes to your point, Rick, of he's very anti-concerned with the hypocrisy of a spirituality that is not concerned with justice.
Yep. And
I bring that up too because, and we won't have the time to get into this on this episode, but maybe we'll circle back to it in another one on Matthew. The end of Matthew is very unique. It is not like some of the other synoptic gospels in some ways, in terms of Matthew's vision of God's justice. And the one comment I want to make here with this point is Matthew in chapter 25 has the very famous passage where he says, there will be those who were hungry and you gave them food, thirsty you gave them water, naked you took care of them, in prison you visited them. And what does Jesus say? He says, what you've done to these, you've done to me. And I think that helps me understand this tension in 5 and 6, that it is the justice of these actions.
So those sheep who did that, they then asked Jesus, when did we see you hungry?
Yeah.
When did we see you thirsty? And Jesus, so we know they were not doing it to earn some other favor or reward.
Yep.
They just fed the hungry because they were there hungry.
Yep.
They just gave someone something to drink because they were thirsty. It was not for another reason. It was pure intention.
Yep.
And an act of love.
Yep, that's exactly right. I think that's helpful.
That helps answer that question, right, Allie? We have another question. This one is from Susan.
Hi, this is Susan from Melbourne. I have a simple question that actually may be very complicated. And my question is, why did Jesus always teach in parables and seeming riddles? Question mark. Why didn't he just say what he had to say so it's clear for all of us to understand? Let me know.
Susan, that's a fantastic question because not only do we have a hard time with the stories, but so do the people there with Jesus. What's really interesting is in Matthew 13, Jesus kind of gives his own answer to this question. I'm going to read to you the Message translation of this. Matthew 13:10, and the Message has it written, "The disciples came up and asked, 'Why do you tell stories?' He replied, 'You've been given insight into God's kingdom. You know how it works. Not everybody has this gift, this insight. It hasn't been given to them. Whenever someone has a ready heart for this, the insights and understandings flow freely. But if there is no readiness, any trace of receptivity soon disappears. That's why I tell stories, to create readiness, to nudge the people toward a welcome awakening. In their present state, they can stare till doomsday and not see it. Listen till they're blue in the face and not get it. I don't want Isaiah's forecast repeated all over again. Your ears are open, but you don't hear a thing. Your eyes are awake, but you don't see a thing. The people are stupid. They stick their fingers in their ears so they won't have to listen. They screw their eyes shut so they won't have to look, so they won't have to deal with me face to face, and let me heal them."
Yeah, I think it's very telling that Matthew here references Isaiah because, again, this is where I'm going to sound like a broken record whenever we talk about the Gospels. Knowing the Old Testament is really going to help. This is a very, not parables, but this idea of speaking in a way where it requires ears to hear and eyes to see is very, very common in the prophets. And often in the prophets, it is a trope of true prophecy that many are not able to understand. You would think it would be the reverse, right? True prophecy would be connected to everyone following and everyone understanding. But there was just this paradox in the ancient world and in ancient Israel that it was understood that true revelation is there are those who God has given the eyes to see and the ears to hear. And Matthew and Jesus kind of play on that here. In fact, what you see in the NRSV, in that verse that you read, Natalie, is Jesus talks about a secret. So in verse 11 of 13, he says, to you it has been given to know the secrets. The Greek word is actually, it's really mystery, mysterion. And when we get to Mark, we'll see that scholars will talk about the Markan secret, that in the Gospel of Mark, and Matthew kind of draws on this. Jesus is actually going around telling people,
Keep it quiet.
Keep it quiet. Don't
yeah.
tell people. So there's actually a sense that there's kind of this paradox, this comic thing happening in the Gospels where Jesus doesn't want everyone to immediately understand what is happening. There's a sense of, again, this is very prophetic, a divine unfolding. And I'm going to say something really quick. I don't love the Message translation of this passage because I think it actually translates it in a way that makes it sound like this is an eternal thing. This is a thing that like God gives some people to understand parables and not others. And I love Eugene Peterson. I love the Message, but I think when it's translated that way, it kind of misses that this is a very temporal thing Jesus is doing. He is doing this so as not to spread the secret too quickly, which will be fully unveiled in the Passion. John actually does this really, really well. For John, the secret is actually the glory of the Lord, and Jesus is embodying that glory. And when you get to the end of the Gospel of John and the Passion narrative, John talks about that moment being the true unveiling of the glory of the Lord. So that's a lot of information. There's some simple things that can be said, and I think Rick wants to say some of them about what makes parables just a very normal poetic device.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the reason Jesus teaches in parables is because that's what they did back then.
Right.
You know, I have people all day long, friends, family members, parishioners, send me memes, right? A little GIF or a little cartoon or something like that.
Is it GIF or GIF?
I always say
always
GIF.
get it
I think
wrong.
it's GIF. GIF is the peanut butter, Rick.
Okay. Whatever.
At any rate.
Boomer.
I'm Gen X.
All right.
Back
all
off.
right. All right.
Back off.
Hey, we're multi-generational.
Oh, wow. Yes, we are.
Not quite. Me and you are both millennials, right?
Are we?
Yep.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
right
Well,
on the
I'm an
end
elder
of millennials.
millennial.
Yeah, you're an elder. I'm a younger millennial. You're an elder millennial. Rick's just an ancient.
Different generations have different ways of communicating.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And so, like, why did this person send me a meme instead of just tell me what they wanted to say? Well, it's because memes are something that are in our culture that we do.
Yep.
Why does Jesus tell parables? It's because something that was in the culture that they did.
Mm-hmm.
It was related to the ancient riddle. Parables are related to the riddle. There's always almost always in a long form parable, there's a moment of surprise. There's something in there that shouldn't be in there, and it's meant to evoke a sense of surprise, delight, or
Comedy.
anger or
Yeah.
comedy. People are like, "No, you're not supposed to do that.
Yep.
That's crazy. That's not supposed to happen." Like in the parable of like the prodigal son, the fact that the prodigal son takes his inheritance early.
Right.
You don't do
would have
that.
shocked people, or
Yeah.
that the father runs out to him. That would have never
Running,
been done.
like
Yeah.
fathers don't run. They,
Yeah.
they're
dignified.
They're
They're-
dignified
yeah.
and stately. And so there's always a thing that's supposed to surprise and delight, and that is tied into where the meaning is. And so, like a riddle, you're meant to kind of work for it a little bit. Christianity, the religion that Jesus brings us, the spirituality that Jesus brings us, isn't just a list of simple precepts that like if you just do this and this and this, then
Right.
everything's fine. But it's something you need to be steeped in, and you need to keep. I mean, parables also have the benefit of having more than one meaning. I mean, you can kind of keep going deeper and deeper into parables. There's not just one sermon on the parable of the sower or the parable of the lost coin. When those show up in the gospel lessons, there's 5,000 different sermons happening in different churches on that same parable. Because it's not just a simple precept. It's something you can keep like going back to and digging into farther and farther.
I think the other thing about using a story to give a lesson is that it creates a little bit of a barrier between you and what's being learned, right? So, for example, Jesus could have called people out straight up, but by speaking in parables, sometimes it gives people a moment to stop and think about it and come to their own realization, rather than, right, if you're just kind of called out for what's going on, defensiveness might be your first response. But if you take it in and steeps into you, you come to realize from your own understanding what's been going on, and it sticks with you differently.
There's something I want to say that I always find so funny. I always have heard from choir directors that no one ever remembers the sermon, but they'll leave the church singing or humming the hymn.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that is true that I've even noticed here at St. David's with Rick, and Rick
no one
preaches.
remembers
Yeah,
the sermon.
Rick
No one
preaches
remembers the sermon.
magnificent
That's
sermons.
where you're going with
no,
that.
No,
Okay.
no, no, no,
I
no.
should share them on social
Rick
media.
preaches magnificent sermons. But do you know what people always talk to me about remembering from Rick's sermons? The stories that he shares.
Yep.
And I think to me that like perfectly encapsulates why Jesus uses parables,
Right.
Because people remember it, like you said, Rick. It steeps, it sticks with you. When you go to church on Sunday and it's Wednesday, you don't really remember the like very didactic, prescriptive points the sermon gave, but you definitely remember the story Rick told about being in his underwear next to his neighbor at his first parish house.
Yeah.
Yes.
This isn't a weird story.
Still
Go back
5
and find
months
that
ago,
sermon.
and we're still right. Yeah.
So that I think
Or
that's
the
a
strange things you thought after your stroke when you're left
Yeah.
alone in a room.
Yes.
Somebody
Yes.
asks you if you're Batman.
Yes. So sermons are great. People learn from them. The prescriptive points help people. And they do, all jokes aside, they do remember it. But there's something to stories that we're just geared to remember them more.
And the stories, the parables that Jesus tells are deeply rooted in the experience of his people,
Yep.
that are agrarian society. And so he almost, not all, but a lot of his parables have to deal with farming because they would have known what's going on with that. He's relating faith to things they already had experience with.
Yes. And the last thing I'll say, but beat this horse, is that a lot of that language is not only cultural and agrarian, it is deeply rooted in Old Testament metaphors and language.
Yeah.
So, you talk about parables of a vineyard and wine and grapes, like a lot of that language is used
Straight out of Amos.
Yeah.
Straight out of the prophet Amos.
All over. Yeah, all over. And Israel is often described as a vineyard. So a lot of this language, you have to pick up on the resonances of Israel's story and scripture that's being evoked through this language.
And this is why we were going to read from cover to cover.
Exactly.
And why initially we weren't going to go through the Gospels right away, partly so that you all are getting like that steeping in the Old Testament to lead you to this point.
I think that just about, there's so much we could talk for hours
we could talk
about
for
Matthew.
hours, but we will, because
we will.
we're going to come back around
3
to
more
this
times.
another 3 times this year. So send in your questions. I'm sure you've got more things. I know I still have other stuff I made note of that we didn't get to, but we've got a few more times to do that. Thank you for listening in to our episode here on Matthew, and back to Leviticus at our next episode.
See you there.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cross Connections Cover to Cover. New episodes drop each Wednesday. Please be sure to follow or like us on your favorite podcasting app to find us easily each week, or join us on our email list at stdavidschurch.org/crossconnections. If you have questions for us, you can call us at 484-588-5656 and leave a voicemail with your name, where you're from, and your question or comment. Please note, we may use your recorded voice in an upcoming episode of Cross Connections. If you like what you hear, we'd love if you would share this with your friends and rate us in Spotify and Apple Podcasts or whatever other app you're using so people can find us as well. Don't forget to visit our show notes for the year's reading list and any other resource links we've mentioned. Cross Connections is a ministry of St. David's Episcopal Church in Wayne, Pennsylvania. Season 2 Cover to Cover is hosted by
Rick Morley.
Elliot Van Hoy.
and Natalie Hill. Logo graphic design and podcast production by Natalie Hill. Stock media music provided by Marscott and Mood Mode Pond 5. You're welcome to learn more about all of St. David's worship and ministries at stdavidschurch.org.